I've said before that Inanimate Insanity is what I would consider the pinnacle of what the object show community has to offer, but I've never thoroughly explained why. I have said that the more recent episodes have nice animation, the characters are fun to watch, and the writing is really good, but I feel like summing it all up like that would be doing it a disservice. And I feel like the best way to truly demonstrate my thoughts on the show is to review the episodes where it started to turn into something beautiful. Episode 11, Kick the Bucket, is the first episode of the show that really impressed me. After watching it, I knew that the show had changed. So what was this change? Well, as we like to do it around here, I'll go over the entire episode and analyze as many elements of the show as I can. And I won't be going through the entire episode all in one video because God knows my poor editing software can't handle it. So if I'm going to be diving right into the 11th episode of the second season, I've got some recapping to do, especially since this episode relies a lot on past episodes. Skip to this time frame if you want to skip the recap. Alright, let's do this. Starting at the end of the first season, Miphone the host had to be saved by Marshmallow, who had to throw Bo into a metal box until she got insane with rage and fell off a cliff alongside Miphone and the guy who tried to kill him, leaving them all exploded and dead. Wow, that was a lot to take in. I know, Marshmallow seemed like a giant jerk, but she did it so she can try and save Miphone, and this is the first time Bo has done something influential to the plot. Plus, Bo is pretty much the only character that would be stupid and crazy enough to perform such a feat, so yeah. Bo now lives in a haunted mansion as a ghost with her sibling, Doe. In season 2, Marshmallow befriended Apple, a very clingy friend of hers that was later revealed to have been pretending to be her friend so the viewers that like Marshmallow would also like her. Admittedly, the way this is revealed is pretty stupid. Apple is just all by herself talking out loud saying, "Now that Marshmallow's gone, I can enjoy myself. Man, she sure does suck." And Marsh doesn't question anything. But I digress. Now, Marshmallow is angry at Apple, who has now been eliminated, and is questioning who she can and can't trust when she's on the show. She's also in a team that's too mixed up in the show to talk to her, so she's looking for someone outside of the show to talk to. I personally like this conflict. The reveal with Apple is honestly pretty silly, but I generally get what they were trying to go for. And it's just interesting to see the negative effect the competition has had on Marsh and who she can truly trust. Meanwhile, Suitcase, Nickel, and Baseball formed an alliance early in the second season. Baseball's meant to be the team leader of the group, but Nickel has been very ruling over Suitcase, being very controlling and sometimes outright rude to her. Suitcase doesn't really like how Nickel treats her, but she tries to keep it to herself and think of it as Nickel trying to help her contribute for her team. But this approach has made her question who she can trust, which has given her some pretty bad anxiety. Baseball's been trying to keep his alliance together, but events have just been happening to his team. Events that he doesn't feel like he's in control of, events that make him feel like a spectator rather than a leader. One example of this is when Suitcase began to befriend Balloon, a contestant that was awful to everyone last season, but is trying to be a better person. But there have been moments where Balloon's attempts to help his team just ended up hurting them. Therefore, Nickel has been trying to distance Suitcase from Balloon because he believes that he'll bring nothing but trouble to their alliance and their entire team. Arguments have broken out between the two of them over how Balloon should be treated. Baseball has tried to intervene in these arguments, but since Nickel is a close friend of his, and since he doesn't want to come on too strong onto Suitcase, he can't bring himself to do so. Plus, the fact that Balloon has heard Nickel talking bad about him and has gotten upset at him for it, it's safe to say that Suitcase's relationship with her alliance has been a bit of a mess. But I really like this dynamic. Like I said, it's a mess, but it feels oddly realistic. Nickel isn't an evil overlord with nothing but bad intentions. He wants to keep his alliance together, win the competition, and is just pretty insensitive. Those might not be the most interesting motives, but they make sense. It makes sense for him to have these motives. Suitcase and Balloon are rightfully upset by his actions, and their friendship also makes sense. Suitcase is very caring and understanding towards Balloon, and Balloon wants to have literally any friend and become a better person. Baseball doesn't feel very involved in this entire conflict, but that's what his problem is. He doesn't like that he isn't helping in their relationship, even though he's the team leader. He just can't think of what to say every time he tries to speak up, and I personally really relate to that. Now for Knife, he's been keeping to himself for most of the second season and doesn't have much of a relationship with anyone on his team. Most of the very few interactions he's had with his team have either been heckling or judging, but he has shown to have a little bit of interest in giving people advice and helping them. It's not yet explained why he enjoys giving people advice, considering he's not a very social guy, but I do think the 11th episode manages to explain it. I like Knife. He's not your overly obnoxious jerk character that gets way too much screen time. He keeps to himself as much as he can. His cynical nature is a nice contrast against the rest of the bubblier characters, and whenever he does heckle someone, it makes sense why he does it, and it's never annoying. Knife doesn't have a big backstory, but he does have an impact in this episode, and I think he's worth mentioning. You'll see why later on. And finally, Microphone. She's a bit of a wild card. She's helped her team and hindered it in the past, but she overall hasn't been seen as much of an asset. Enter Taco. She's last season's second place contestant on the show and is not content with that. She was in it for the $1 million and very little else. She devised a plan with Microphone where Taco would help Mike with her team as long as they split the $1 million when they win. This of course is completely against the rules and is not allowed in the show at all. But wanting to prove herself to her team and to get the money, she agrees to the deal. The two are now a pretty functional duo that's trying to win the $1 million but also trying not to get caught. The setup for this dynamic makes a lot of sense. Taco sees lots of potential in Mike, but she wants her to make more precise actions rather than be the wild card that she is. And it makes sense how Mike doesn't just care about winning the competition, she also wants to prove herself to her team. She wants to prove what she's truly capable of to everyone. Not much has been done with their dynamic yet, but that's probably because they've only had one episode to show it. And those are the most important backstories for this episode. There are a couple more, but they're not very influential to this specific episode and will be discussed for other ones. Now with all that out of the way, it's time to actually get into the episode. We start off with Marshmallow walking over to the haunted house where Bo lives. She's quickly stopped by Meatpad, the show's co-host, who tells her that she's nearing the outside of the show's parameters and that she must turn back. But since Meatpad isn't much of a bodyguard, she's able to get past him, leaving him feeling very worried. Marshmallow enters the house and is greeted by Bo and Doe. Marsh tells Bo that she's been feeling guilty and uncertain lately and that no one else has been wanting to talk to her about how she's been feeling. She also mentions that she's mostly been thinking about Apple. Bo quickly changes the subject, getting offended by how Marsh said that she feels like she's beating a dead horse, and they're interrupted by Doe and a silly quip of his. Then that good ol' intro plays. A pretty odd way to transition into the intro, but it does work for setting up the scene with Marshmallow. After the intro, Mephone presents the challenge to the contestants, which is called Bucket Brigade. In the challenge, each team has to fill a giant reservoir by passing a bucket from the dock and back. As the reservoir fills, the platform inside will rise. Once they're high enough, the contestant on the platform will grab a key and jump into the water. The key will be used to unlock a chest with 3 balls in it. The team then throws their balls at their respective target. The team that hits their target 3 times wins the challenge. A bit of an arbitrary challenge structure, as TestTube actually mentions, but I think it works fine. It's pretty understandable and challenges each team's sense of teamwork quite well, which is honestly all you really need in a team challenge. Mephone then reveals that the contestants are now the ones who vote to be eliminated instead of the viewers, and I say good riddance. I continue to stand by my belief that contestant votes are much more interesting than viewer votes. The interactivity of viewer votes are fun, but I value having eliminations being led by character decisions rather than whoever the audience likes the least, and the contestant voting is used in a very interesting way, as we'll see later on. Mephone irritatedly tells Nickel, who has been mocking him throughout the challenge explanation, that he and the other teams need to figure out who will do what in the next challenge. Suitcase tries to heckle Mephone like how Nickel did, but immediately just apologizes. Balloon, who's still getting used to supporting his friend, just pretends that Suitcase told a really funny joke. Nickel, who's well versed in the art of sarcasm, reads this as Balloon just making fun of her and asks to have a conversation within their alliance. He says that their alliance can't afford to have any more trouble from Balloon and that his presence alone had begun to tear the 3 of them apart. He says that it would be best for all of them if they simply stopped talking to him beyond the bare minimum. Baseball, who instantly sees the rudeness of this request, takes Nickel aside to have a word with him. He tells Nickel that Suitcase and Balloon are friends just like the 2 of them and that forcing them apart would be outright hypocritical. Nickel reluctantly agrees but says that there's a large difference between being in an alliance and being friends. An alliance that blends into a personal friendship isn't built to last in a competition, especially one that can only have one winner. Baseball agrees but says that an alliance shouldn't have anyone feel as if they have no control, such as Suitcase. She should be allowed to have a friend, and that is her choice to make. Nickel ponders for a bit and seemingly agrees, saying that Suitcase should feel like she has a choice. He says that it'll do him one better, and Baseball thinks he won him over, so he lets Nickel talk to Suitcase again. When he walks over, Balloon gives him a very passive-aggressive jab, saying that now Suitcase exists again. With an overly friendly tone, Nickel tells Suitcase that she really changed his mind about Balloon, and that she would know better than anyone how Balloon should be treated, so he gives Suitcase the freedom of choosing what Balloon does in the challenge. Overjoyed by her freedom of choice, she assigns Balloon to fill up buckets with water by the lake. Off-put by the responsibility she's giving him, Nickel begrudgingly gives him the role, leaving Balloon feeling very nervous. And can I just say, this entire scene shows the character dynamics really well. That might not sound like a big deal, like of course the character dynamics of these characters are shown, why wouldn't they be shown? But I feel like having the dynamics shown very well and very early in the episode episode is really important for setting the theme of the episode. Giving the viewer a good idea of how these characters interact at the beginning of the episode gives it interest and focus. The viewer would want to see how this dynamic will change later on in the story. And that's just invaluable, especially in an episode where there's more than 10 other characters in it. Suitcase's lack of power in her alliance and her reluctance to stand up for herself is shown. Balloon's awkward struggle to support his friend and his frustration with the way Nickel treats her is shown. Baseball's attempt at helping the relationship within his alliance is shown. Nickel's controlling, manipulative, but oddly understandable way of treating Suitcase's role in his team is absolutely shown. The way these character dynamics are displayed is super effective. After watching this scene, I needed to see what would happen to these four later on. Anyway, Taco and Mike are revealed to be listening in on their entire conversation. From what Nickel said, Taco infers that Nickel is using the challenge as a test of Balloon's ability. Balloon, who realizes this, worries over the fact that their entire team is going to be depending on him. He tells Suitcase that he doesn't need his team's approval. She reassures him, saying that he's going to win the challenge for himself. Taco scoffs at her and says to Mike that the game isn't about winning for oneself, it's about setting up the winner for the future. She says that Baseball and Nickel are giving Balloon this pressure, hoping he'll make a huge mistake so they'll have a reason to get Balloon out of the team if they lose in the challenge. She tells Microphone that her job is to provide them with that reason. And the way she's supposed to provide this reason is to, in her words, temporarily paralyze him, potentially rendering him useless in the challenge. Mike finds this plan to be completely wrong and refuses to go through with it. Taco compares this plan to when she told Mike the directions to get out of the maze in the last challenge, and says that Mike didn't have much of a problem with that cheating plan. Microphone emphasizes that this plan involves straight up attacking people rather than simply being given directions. Taco says that ethics will get them nowhere in the game. She also brings up the fact that Microphone was the reason her team couldn't win in the last challenge, so she's also someone who's at risk of getting voted off the team. She brings up the choice of either having a target painted on Microphone's back or Balloon's. Resentfully, yet admittedly seeing her point, Microphone says she'll think about it. She walks away and the scene ends. Now, this is the first big interaction Mike and Taco have had with each other ever since they formed their alliance. And much like the previous scene, this one displays their dynamic exceptionally. I just love how Mike and Taco's personalities are almost completely opposing. Taco's wicked way of thinking clashing with Mike's much more ethical mindset is super entertaining. They also both have a certain level of sass that makes their personalities kind of complement each other. I just never thought these two would be able to have a dynamic that would work so well. They're like some sort of dysfunctional family that somehow manages to get by. So after their little argument, Mike walks onto the dock where Balloon is. She decides not to use Taco's temporary paralyzer as she drops it on the dock. She tells Balloon that the role he's taking on in the challenge is a very brave one. Balloon proudly thanks her and says that Suitcase always told him to listen to what he says and that he says that he can do this. Mike mentions that he reminded her of when Soap, one of her friends, told Mike to listen to her heart. She also mentions how Soap said this as she was walking through the elimination portal. While becoming nervous, Balloon asks if she thinks he could be at risk of being eliminated, and Mike says no, but then eventually says yes. Balloon becomes even more nervous as Mike says that she wouldn't have been able to take such a risk, and she continues to compliment his bravery as she leaves Balloon feeling even more worried than he was before. This scene is fine, but I never really understood why Balloon didn't have an aggressive reaction towards Mike. He kinda just freaked out in the entire scene. Balloon isn't a constantly angry person, but he does lash out when the situation calls for it, and with Mike obviously trying to make him nervous, I find it hard to believe for him to just stand there and freak out. I also just think having him lash out at Mike would have made a more interesting scene in general. It would have made the scene more dramatic, and it would have also emphasized that what Mike is doing is much less cowardly than just simply tasing Balloon. It would have emphasized how bold Microphone's move is, and it would paint Balloon to be more than just a nervous wreck. Not that Balloon shouldn't be nervous because of what Mike said. In fact, I think having him become angry would have also further emphasized how nervous he was. Balloon would have become mad to try and hide his nervousness. Again, this scene was fine. I just would have liked it better if this change were to be added. Now, as the challenge is about to begin, Paintbrush notices that Marshmallow is absent. Paintbrush stops the challenge from beginning, and Meatpat tells Mephone that Marshmallow has exited the parameters of the show. Mephone then invokes the Her Loss clause and says that if Marshmallow doesn't return by the next episode, she will be disqualified and eliminated. After a couple reactions from Fan and Paintbrush, the scene cuts back to Marshmallow and Bo. Bo starts telling Marshmallow the story of how she became a ghost, but Marsh tunes it all out as she remembers all the moments she had with Apple up until the time she betrayed her. Once she snaps out of her flashback, flashback, Bo asks her about how her life has been going. Marshmallow changes the subject right back to Apple, saying that she seemed like the perfect friend to her. She wasn't a fan of her clinginess, but she thought Apple was clingy because she cared a lot about her. And when she found out that Apple was only using her, she can't seem to tell if any relationship on the show was real. Bo tries to be honest with Marshmallow and says that she never thought Apple was important and that she could keep thinking about her forever, but now that they're not in the show anymore, they have to start facing the real world. Marshmallow mentions that she's unfortunately still on the show, and Bo, who's shocked by how long the show has been going on for, says that the show has been run into the ground. Marshmallow thanks Bo for listening and says that Paintbrush gets too caught up in the anxiety of the show for a moment to talk. Bo tells her that she won't have that problem with her since she now has all the time in the world. She then quickly asks her,
"I'm all that you need, right?"
Marshmallow becomes very confused by this question, and Bo pretends like she didn't say anything. Marsh then starts to become suspicious of Bo and says that she thinks she's hiding something from her. Bo tries denying it, but it only makes herself look even more like a suspicious liar. Bo's lies become more obvious, and Marshmallow becomes more suspicious until eventually she breaks.
Maybe you're the one that's lying. Maybe Kumquat wasn't such a good friend to you. Maybe she didn't deserve to have your friendship, and maybe I made her say all those things to you just so you'd see that it's true.
There's a long silence between them, and we switch to the next scene. I always appreciated how in this scene, Bo never actually tries to trivialize Marsh's problem. She actually tries to help her move on, which is a much more effective way of helping her. It also shows that Bo isn't trying to hurt Marshmallow by lying to her. I wasn't a huge fan of Bo just blurting out what she did. I feel like that's a cliche that only ever happens in cartoons. But Bo is a pretty cartoony character, so I suppose it makes sense. I just would have preferred if she just straight up confessed in a relatively silly way. And other than that, I don't have many problems with this scene. It was a pretty well done surprise. So on to the next scene. Here is where the challenge finally starts. There's not a whole lot to say about the beginning of it. It's pretty much just standard challenge action. Paintbrush yells at Lightbulb, Fan has a mental breakdown. It's a lot of fun. Balloon tries to bring his team's bucket back to the water, but he ends up tripping and dropping it off the dock. Nickel frustratedly tells Suitcase to get it back, and she plunges into the water. But as she retrieves the bucket, she starts to have some sort of episode. Voices start to echo in her head, and something seems to grab her, preventing her from resurfacing. Some darkness starts to surround her, and the voices echo louder and louder and louder until she's finally able to resurface. She throws the bucket back to Nickel, and their team is back in the game. Balloon asks Suitcase if she's okay since she was down there for a while, and she just says,
"Never better."
We fade to black, and that's the end of this half of the episode. So far, this did a great job at setting up the first half of the episode. I feel like what makes it so fun to watch for me is the character dynamics and relationships. I've never seen such fun yet fairly realistic character interactions in an object show before. It's so refreshing to see, especially in a game show setting where the narrative is heavily led by the contestants. Usually, object shows mostly focus on the challenge aspects of the show and the characters aren't given a whole lot of depth. That's kind of how Inanimate Insanity used to be in its first season and its early season 2 episodes. But here, the story stretches beyond the competition. It focuses much more on the characters and how their relationships are affected by the competition. It makes the narrative so much more engaging that way. I've got much more to say about the episode, but I'll have to save it for the second half. For now, I'll just say that with this half alone, I knew that this show was changing for the better. I couldn't have been more excited to see how this episode was going to end.